Previously on Chaos Head Noah. The room was around 10 square meters in size. Past the entrance there was a bathroom to the right and a bed in the back. And on the bed sat Ayase, stained with blood from head to toe. Her hollow eyes pierced straight through us. Misumi-kun let out a pathetic scream, then shoved me aside and flew out of the room. I wanted to run as well, but my legs were frozen in place. I quivered in fear. Why are Rimi and Seina's D-swords here? They're not lying around dead in this room somewhere, are they?
来てくれたのね。
どうしてそんなに血が。
Her pajamas were dyed crimson by an abundance of blood. Blood that hadn't even dried yet. The rusty smell of fresh blood seeped into my nose.
黒騎士の血よ、これは。
黒騎士って綾瀬本人の。
いいえ。
ちょっと誰？綾瀬はその人を殺したの？
Ayase smiled a wide smile, and then she giggled.
怯えているのね、匠。
I casually picked up the book on the bedside table in front of me. On the cover was Gladioul Saga Volume 17, the Book of Psalms and Revelation.
グラジオールって何なの？
邪悪なる存在。負の妄想の塊。人の心の闇に偏在する無意識の集合体。世界に破滅をもたらす神。言い方はいろいろ。
そいつは車椅子に乗ってるの？足が不自由とか？
グラジオールは人の形をしているとは限らないわ。もういいわよ、こっちを見ても。
I slowly turned back around to face Ayase. She was already done changing clothes, and for some reason she was now wearing her school uniform.
ギガロマニアックスだよ。セナはディソードを持つ力の持ち主のことをそう呼んでた。ディソードはディラックの海につながったパイプだとかなんとか。
呼び方は人それぞれかもしれないわ。ディソードは人の邪心を具現化したものよ。グラジオール記目視録詩編にそう書いてある。第3巻11章23節。予言書なのよ、それは。
As she said that, her gaze was fixated on the book in my hands.
みんなはこう言うわ。私が歌詞によって予知を行っていると。だけど私はグラジオール記目視録詩編からインスピレーションを受けているだけ。その詩編こそ予言の書なのよ。なぜ気づかないの？誰も。
Good question.
予言の書って冗談でしょ？
事実よ。この渋谷で今まさに起きていることを、そしてこれから起きようとしていることをスイグラーは予言し物語にしている。
スイグラー？
グラジオール記目視録詩編の作者。個人だけれどスイグラーは強大な黒騎士だったと思うわ、私は。
I was really starting to think that Black Knights was just her term for Gigalomaniacs. And if the author of this book was a Gigalomaniac, then no wonder he could predict the future. I skimmed through the book I was holding. The Gladioul Saga, Volume 17, the Book of Psalms and Revelation. And what I saw shocked me. It was blank.
君が見ているものと私が見ているもの、その違いは邪神による影響よ。邪神の集合体が邪神をグラジオール。目覚めようとしている。もうすぐ。もしも目覚めたらきっとこの世に67億ある世界は邪神王が生む混沌によって混じり溶け合うことになるわ。境界が消え邪神により連結された世界になるのよ。あらゆるものが規則性もなく生まれ、あらゆるものが一瞬で死ぬ。概念も認識も因果律もすべて破壊される。すべてあるがゆえに何もない世界。あらゆる神話と同じように予言されているわ。終末予言、滅びの歌。
Was that really true? Was that what was written in the blank book? In the Gladioul Book of Psalms and Revelation?
このままでは滅びの結末に至るだけ。今止められるのは私と君二人しかいないの。
どうして僕ら二人なの？
導きよ。他の黒騎士はすでに邪神王に侵食されてしまった。杭を打って杭を打って闇夜を切り裂き月光を浴びて幾千もの鉄意は汝の痛みとなりて今解き放たれる。やがて叫びは宙に舞い夜空は赤く染まるだろう。
Ayase was sitting on her bed, eating some hospital food. Wait. She wasn't actually eating it. She was just listlessly poking her frozen tofu with her chopsticks, all the while quietly singing a song. It was one of the prophetic phantasm songs, the one that foretold the third New Gen case, the crucifixion.
食べてもいいわよ。
Have some what? Oh, tofu. She picked up some frozen tofu for chopsticks and offered it to me.
それって綾瀬が食べたくないだけじゃ。
そうよ。
Well, at least she's being honest. She pursed her lips into a smile.
まずいの、病院食は。不浄な邪神に染まっているのね。きっと。
Well, okay. God damn it. Wicked Heart's this, Wicked Heart's that. Was that all she knew how to say? The two of us were talking online. She'd have been banned for spamming by now.
邪神に染まってるのに僕は食べてもいいの？
Good question. Well, Ayase, is this halal for me to eat? I wonder how many of you people watching would get the reference to what I just said.
普段から邪神まみれでしょ、匠は。
Well, you know what they say. You are what you eat.
コンビニのお弁当やカップ麺は不浄なる食べ物の最たる例よ。
She's not wrong, actually. You want to know something fun, dear viewer? Look up microscopic organisms / insects in instant noodles. Have fun!
黒騎士として覚醒するためには摂取をやめるべきだわ。
綾瀬は普段は何を食べてるの？
チョコレート。
That's surprisingly, what's the word I want to use? Typical?
チョコレートって十分邪神に染まってそうな気がするけど。
Yeah, well, it's a good kind of taint, Takumi. Was that actually all she ate? Chocolate? Talk about an unbalanced diet. Hers was worse than mine. WTF. Yeah, because, I mean, if that's all she eats, where does all the fat go?
チョコレートはいいわ。邪神を打ち払う力を持つのよ。あの甘さは。
Sweetness? Must be a milk chocolate eater then, because the more pure the chocolate, the more bitter the taste. Bullshit. You may talk fancy, but really, you just have a sweet tooth. And so it continues. Greetings, my name's Neosekken, and welcome back to my Let's Play of Chaos Head Noah. So, I still got no idea where all the blood that Ayase was soaking herself in came from. But I know one thing for sure, so far. She likes chocolate. So maybe if she is potentially homicidal towards us, it might be a good idea to have a chocolate bar handy on us. It might just placate her. You never know. But seriously, I really want to figure out what's the deal with her having all these D swords handy, because I don't think any of the other heroines are dead. And yet their D swords are here, and their corpses were nowhere in sight when we first came across Ayase to begin with, so there's a mystery here. And I want to solve it. When she finished feeding me, Ayase had once again started going on about the Gladioul saga, but this time she really got into it. Even once the sun had started setting, she seemed oblivious to the fact that the room was getting darker. Not once had she thought to turn on the lights. For the most part, though, she'd pretty much just gone in depth on the things she'd already mentioned prior to that. Nothing really new. And she wasn't exactly the most engaging storyteller. Speak for yourself. So now, I was starting to get sleepy. Though, considering that Shogun was still out there, if only you knew just how close he really is, it probably wasn't smart to be dozing off.
というわけなのよ。理解できた？
Duty! I got it. Whatever it is, it's my duty. I hadn't listened to a word she'd said, but I decided to just nod for now. But when I did, Ayase squinted at me, then moved in close.
聞いてなかったのね。
Perceptive. What you gonna do now, Takumi? She's onto you.
No.
She usually didn't show much in the way of emotion, but I guess even she could get mad under the right circumstances. Maybe I should apologize for upsetting her. Well, she could be one of those people where outwardly she doesn't emote much, but otherwise she emotes just like any other person, or rather she feels emotions just like any other person can. I mean, there are people out there that are genuinely like that.
それも邪神に染まっているせいよ。
Understatement of the freaking century. Oh my god! Again with the wicked hearts!
先に取り除かなくてはならないようね。 君の侵食した邪神を。
Oh boy. What exactly do you have in mind? Because I doubt it's going to be pleasant.
でなければ純粋なる邪神は培養されない。
取り除く？
That's right. Not excite, excise. She's going to excise the pure Indian purity in your heart, not excite it. What was she trying to do to me? By the sound of it, some kind of terrifying heart surgery. Eh? It could be. I mean, that blood she had on her earlier had to come from somewhere, sure, certainly. Maybe it involved a little bit of surgery, a la Hazuki. Although in all due seriousness, if it is something like that, then we've got bigger problems. It gave me the chills just thinking about it. But it seemed like my guess was off. With a slightly sorrowful expression. Sorrowful? Sorrowful. I forgot to put the L at the end of sorrowful. With a slightly sorrowful expression, Ayase licked her lips. I'd caught a quick glimpse of her pink tongue, and I must admit, that moment was extremely sexy. If all it takes is a little pink to get you to get your panties wet, then pff, I imagine, yeah, you won't last long during actual sex. I can tell you that much. You'll end up leaving whoever you end up sleeping with sorely disappointed, because you came far too soon.
君の邪神を取り除くためなら何でもするわ。望みがあったら言って。
Play a game of Tetris with me. Anything. Well, I still didn't know what she meant by excise your impurity, but you could try asking. Well then, how about, for starters?
キスでもしてもらおうか。
Straight to the point. How bold of you. Despite the darkness, I could see the rigidness of her expression. Her expression's always rigid. What are you talking about? Uh-oh. Maybe I'd gone a little too far. I really didn't want her to start hating me, and I definitely didn't want her to abandon me, so I rushed to apologize. Or at least I tried to, but she didn't give me the opportunity. Instead, she grabbed me by the collar and shoved me right into a nearby closet. Maybe she wants extra privacy for this.
何を？
Or maybe there's danger nearby. She pressed her body up against mine, and then she closed the door behind us, leaving us tightly packed inside the closet. The closet was incredibly cramped. It wasn't designed for people. In order for two people to fit, they had to be pressed right up against each other. Don't get too excited, Takumi. It didn't help that I could feel Yase's stifled breaths on my ear, either. Maybe it was how dark it was, but the situation was really turning me on. Like I said, he's easy.
どうしたの？
看護師の見回りよ。
And here I was thinking that the nurses were all gone. Oh. So that's why we were hiding. Visiting was prohibited at night, so obviously sleeping over was too. If they found out I was here, they'd kick me out immediately. Okay, but why was Ayase hiding with me? She doesn't want to get poked and prodded by the nurses, duh.
この病院にも敵は多いわ。
敵？
グラジオールの使い、私たちの心を支配しようと 虎視眈々と狙っているのよ。
Even the nurses were our enemies? Oh, yeah. Especially the nurses.
それってただの被害妄想。
静かに。
I had no clue what brought it on, but Ayase suddenly sealed my lips with hers. You know, you could just cover his mouth with your hand. If silence is all you're really going for here. Just saying. Okay, I guess she doesn't just want silence. She wants saliva, too. Lucky you, I guess, Takumi? Her lips were soft. It was enough of a shock to make my mind go completely blank. That was when I heard the door open, and at the same time, some strange mechanical sound. Whoever they were trying to be stealthy, but I still had heard them come through the door.
いないわ。
Well, speak of the devil, nurse. I heard a female voice. I felt like I heard it before, but I couldn't exactly remember when.
逃げられたのかしら。まさか私たちの正体に気づかれた？ええ、不用意に接触しすぎたのかもしれない。
She was talking to someone, but I couldn't hear the other person's voice. She must have been on the phone. Probably Suwa. Ayase's lips were still glued to mine. Her sweet aroma lingered in the air. It smelled absolutely incredible. They were so soft. And not just her lips, but her breasts, her shoulders, her hips, her thighs. Every part of her body pressed up against mine was soft as could be. There was probably someone really dangerous standing right outside the closet, but that thought didn't even register in my mind. I was completely lost in pleasure. Maybe that's what Nerose should have done to you instead in order to ensure his victory in the first story route, is that instead of torturing you, he should have given you erotic delusions instead. That would have kept you busy.
そっちの処理は済んだ？
Although, thinking about it now, Nerose strikes me as so much of a stiff that he probably doesn't really have much of an imagination for eroticism to begin with. So maybe I'm expecting a bit too much from him in particular on that particular subject.
そう、これからなのね。わかったわ。私はスクランブル交差点に向かうから。それじゃあね。
Oh, she's heading for Scramble Crossing, so I guess that I should take that to mean that the third melt will be starting soon.
守れ。あなたに信仰の救いあれ。
It seems like they'd finished their conversation. And with that, the suspicious woman silently left the room. I could tell that the coast was clear. It would probably be safe to come out of the closet now. But Ayase still hadn't let go of me. And then, for only a moment, she pulled her lips away from mine. She looked at me, tears welling in her eyes.
匠、私は導きで、君が救世主。そう決まっているの。だから何をしてもいいのよ。私に叶えてあげるわ。君のどんな望みでも。
I didn't really get what she was trying to say. I figured she was probably just spewing her crazy delusions again. But either way, I didn't mind.
匠、 に。
Ayase kissed me again. Except this time, it was nothing like before. This time, Ayase's tongue, slick with saliva, forced my mouth open, shoved its way deep inside, and coiled around my own. Nothing else mattered to me anymore. I just let myself give in to the pleasure, embracing Ayase's slender, subtle hips. It was becoming a little hard to breathe. Use your nose. When I tried inhaling, I just ended up sucking in Ayase's hot breaths. Yeah, when you're kissing with someone for prolonged periods, your nose is your best friend for keeping oxygen going into your lungs. I speak from experience. Ayase's saliva spilled into my mouth. It tasted incredibly sweet. I swallowed it with audible gulps. My brain was completely paralyzed, mesmerized to the core. I never expected the touch of a 3D girl to feel this good. I heard a bang bang. Or bang, rather. Single. I heard a sharp sound off in the distance. Startled by the noise, Ayase backed away. Wait a minute, I wonder if Bon is here, and he probably got shot by Suwa.
今の音は
Her lips were soaked in the mixture of our saliva. Even in the darkness, it was clearly visible. Clean up after yourself. I couldn't care less about the sound. I just wanted to get back to making out with Ayase. Always having your priorities straight, aren't you, Takumi? And if possible, go even further beyond. Hell yeah, losing my V card for the win! Well, unfortunately for you, we're not in a full-on eroge. Wait, hold on. Had Ayase been with other men before? I don't think they could handle her. If so, then wouldn't that kind of bring down the whole experience? Only if you let it. Or maybe eroge had just rotted my brain. Nah, there was no way Ayase had past experience. Although, to be fair, if she had experience in double digits, even I would kind of balk at that a little bit personally if I were in your shoes. But, I mean, well, like I said, you're not a full-blown eroge, so I don't think you're going to really get to have that pleasant experience before the apocalypse hits us once more. Which I suspect it will, and it'll probably give us yet another unpleasant ending. Maybe. Maybe. I could be wrong. No normie would want to stick their dick in someone this crazy after all. Well, you're definitely not a normie then, going by this indirect admission. I mean, even Misumi-kun had to run away from her. Well, I would hardly classify him as a normie either.
ヘラヘラしていないで、タクミ。
さあせん。
That's what you get for taking it lightly. Ayase had slapped me. My hopes and dreams were dashed in an instant. Hey, if this were an eroge, the slap would, if anything, this slap would be an indicator that you're probably on the right track. Tsundere and, tsundere behavior and all that. But, well, she's clearly anything but soon. And in their place, anxiety arose, forgot the A. I felt like I was about to cry. Ayase was staring daggers at me, but I couldn't help but cling onto her all the same. You need to hit him
ご
harder.
めん。嫌わないで。
邪神に支配されるのではなく、邪神を己に取り込むのよ。
I think in this instance, it's not so much his wicked heart that's dominating him, but his wicked dick.
でなければ、黒騎士として目覚めることはできない。それを忘れないで。
No, I should have said wicked shaft. Damn it. Pretty sure the reason I'd gone all turned on was because of the kiss, not all this wicked heart stuff. I couldn't be bothered trying to argue with her. Your argument wouldn't be all that good either.
行くわよ。
どこへ？
銃声だったわ。さっきの音。
Gunshot? Here? In Japan? In a hospital? Well, I mean, hey, it's not impossible. I mean, you got organized crime groups like the Yakuza, you got the police and all that. I mean, certain individuals can still use firearms in the land of the rising sun. It's not that much of a stretch. It didn't sound like one to me. Then again, I only ever heard them in movies and video, so it wasn't like I had any frame of reference as to what a real one sounded like. You got freaking MewTube, don't you? Use it. Do your research. Or better yet, just come to America and go to a gun range.
銃声だったとして何をしに行くの？
I'll tell you one thing. If you want to learn what a real gun sounds like, just fire one off yourself. Best education possible. Even if that was... Oh, never mind. I thought that was something I had to narrate.
これもまた予言にあったわ。すでに邪神王との戦いは始まっているのよ。黒騎士の心が殺されていく。だから回収するの。理想道。私たちにできるのはそれだけ。
Hey, speaking of the D swords, where'd they go? Did you stuff them in your skirt pocket or something, Ayase? Do you got a literal pocket dimension in your skirt pocket? Can I stuff a fridge in there? The Black Knights were going to perish. Had that bullet we'd heard been fired at someone? Well, I doubt it was a pigeon that got shot.
警察に。
ダメよ。警察も邪神に支配されてしまっている。
Just like real life. Depending on where you live. We were reaching unprecedented levels of schizo here. Nothing schizo about it. Ayase had completely lost it. The Gladioul saga was nothing more than a delusion of hers. Everything she'd said was nothing more than a delusion of hers. And delusion is power in this part of the world. I had asked myself earlier what kind of ending she'd wish to reach. And I was still asking. Seriously, what was her end goal here? What the hell was I supposed to do?
ついてきて、匠。
Ayase was already on her way out. I hesitated to follow her. But that was when I realized. The 3 D swords leaning against the window were gone. About damn time you noticed. Had she taken them with her? I bit my lip, hesitating for a moment longer. But in the end, I sighed to fall after her. Ayase had gone straight for the rooftop. It was almost as if she knew exactly where the gunshot had come from. There was no hesitation as she walked. The hospital's roof had been turned into some kind of garden. The plants were all fully grown, and the flowers were in full bloom, but it was too dark to tell what color they were. I hid behind Ayase and took a look around. I couldn't sense anyone there. In fact, I didn't sense any signs of life at all. Had the gunshot really come from here? Even if it had, who'd fired it? Guns weren't exactly common in Japan.
やっぱり戻ろうよ。もし撃たれたらまずいよ。
But Ayase didn't listen to my pleas. Instead, she moved even farther into the garden, meaning I pretty much had to follow her. And then I saw a dim blue light in front of me. It was extremely faint, as if it'd go out at any moment, but it was undeniably there, flickering in the darkness.
ディソードだわ。
Hey, it's Mia's D-sword. It was unendingly elegant, and yet it possessed a razor-sharp edge, as if it longed to cut down all around it. Its presence was completely otherworldly. Two people were lying on the concrete near the D-sword. I recognized them.
You are.
The girl in the school uniform, with eyes pointed up at the sky, was Yua. No doubt about it. What was she doing here? And the other person was a middle-aged man. Looking at him closely, I realized it was the same detective that had questioned me after the crucifixion case. Called it! It's Bond. They were both lying down on the ground, completely still. I carefully approached them. That was when I noticed the puddle of blood around them. I jumped back in shock, but it was too late. The crimson liquid already colored the bottom of my shoes. The detective's body was especially soaked in blood. Yua, on the other hand, didn't seem to be wounded. What the hell had happened here? Why were Yua and the detective together? Now that I knew there was a detective involved, the gunshot made more sense. But who had he shot at? Yua? A million questions were racing through my head. So many, in fact, that I couldn't even begin to organize them. I couldn't handle the confusion, so I turned to Ayase for help. Looking as solemn as ever, she ignored the detective and approached Yua's body. Stopping right in front of the pool of blood, she kneeled beside Yua and felt her neck with her fingers.
脈はある。まだ生きているわ。
What about her mind?
だけど、死んでいる。心は。
Guess that answers that question.
そっちの男の人は、もうダメなようね。
She was speaking her usual indifferent tone. Oh, I think I see what's going on here now. The reason why the D-swords are still around. Have the other heroines had their minds destroyed? And their bodies are still alive? Because if that's the case, then I guess that would probably explain why D-swords are still around, even if the wielders themselves are nowhere to be seen. They could just be, their bodies could be just being held somewhere.
なんでそんな落ち着いていられるんだ。人が死んでるんだぞ。
言ったでしょ。予言されていたからよ。
The fuck do you mean foretold?
綾瀬が望んだ妄想じゃないの。
そうかもしれないわね。それを確かめる術はないけれど。
そんな。
構わないわ。原因が何だろうと。
Then Ayase stood up. And pulled her D-sword out of thin air. She took her D-sword, glowing bright red, and touched it against the D-sword that was stuck in the ground. Suddenly, a high-pitched resonance reverberated through the air. A resonance so shrill, it felt like a drill was carving a hole in my ear. Or at least, that was the image the feeling evoked. Immediately after the sound began, the shapes of the two D-swords began to effortlessly distort. Their transformation completely ignored the laws of physics. It was like they were made of liquid or clay. The two swords warped repeatedly, as if writhing in pain. The resonating sound only got worse. Unable to bear it, I tried plugging in my ears, but it didn't help in the slightest. Until suddenly, a shockwave ripped through the air. Before I could even begin to understand what was happening, the D-sword in the ground was in Ayase's left hand. Ayase must have been in agony. Her expression made that very clear. But only a moment later, she looked at me and smiled. She was even blushing slightly, almost like she was aroused or something.
4本目よ。これで。
Something involving the real booting process with your D-sword and touching it to Mia's D-sword. You did something here using that process, and I guess that's the reason why you're able to... I guess it's after doing whatever it is you did that you're able to hold the other heroines as D-swords. I'm not sure if it's like claiming ownership per se. I'm not sure what exactly it is, but something involving that. Something involving real booting. Maybe she'll tell us what it is exactly as she did. Even though there were corpses right in front of her, and whoever shot the middle-aged detective was probably still nearby. How could she put that sword over literally everything else? Was it really that necessary to get the ending she wished to reach? Did she really need all 7 D-swords to defeat Gladioul? Did Gladioul even exist?
Gigalomaniacs となったものは誰だろうと一度は壊れているんだよ。
I remembered what Sena had told me. I suppose that meant Ayase had also broken at some point. Did that mean I'd eventually break too? Well, the eventually was probably unnecessary. After all, I already felt like I was going to break thanks to everything happening with Ayase. Better to break than to bust. Wink wink. Ayase quickly erased the D-swords. 2 of them vanished, as if dissipating into the air itself.
このこと警察に通報するの?
Yua was my enemy. I wouldn't lose any sleep about leaving her body here among all this carnage. But I'd already stepped in the blood. My shoes were leaving footprints all over the pavement, which would yet again be enough to make me a suspect.
通報はしないわ。
A wave of relief washed over me. Ayase was gazing up at the night sky. Her expression still seemed slightly sorrowful.
そろそろね。
Drawing near. What was?
グラジオールは間もなく目覚めるわ。ツイグラーの予言によれば。心して、匠。最悪に包まれるのよ、世界は。君は見たこともない世界を見ることになる。でも乗り越えて、そうしなければグラジオールを倒せない。
Ayase's voice lacked its usual composure. It was almost like she was scared. Would it really be that bad? Whatever was about to happen? Or should I say, the delusion that she was about to turn to reality?
まだ心の準備が。
だったら急いで。もう時間がないわ。
Ready myself? Colonel, that's easier said than done. I don't even know what you think is supposed to happen. So what am I supposed to do?
世界は誘拐し、連結が始まる。
Ayase mumbled that to herself, looking up at the sky. I decided to look up at it too. Here it comes. The third melt. In the sky, I could see a single spot dyed a vivid white. A white so bright, it stuck out like a sore thumb in the night sky. What even was that? I gulped. Come to think of it, hadn't some people reported that the sky had turned white right before the last earthquake? The spot was gradually expanding. It had an inexplicable sense of restlessness to it. It left me completely speechless.
グラジオールが目覚めた。
The earth trembled. The building shook. No, it wasn't just the building shaking. Everything was. The white spot in the sky grew even bigger. Then, we were immediately assaulted by a violent buzzing noise. One that sounded similar to the resonance of the D-sword from before. My head felt like it was about to explode. And then... the world was dyed completely white. Was I dreaming? Even though I'd been only white a moment ago. The sky was dyed red. The world itself had turned to a rusty vermilion. This couldn't be real. It just had to be another delusion. Or at least, that's what I tried to tell myself. All across the sky, I could see clouds upon clouds of black miasma. They seemed almost humanoid in shape. They had to be illusions, though, even if they were unusually vivid. The clouds of haze spontaneously flickered in and out of sight. Even when I thought one had disappeared, it would pop up somewhere else a moment later. The blots of black miasma were innumerable. Just looking at them made me feel uncomfortable. And there was this intense, rotten-smelling stench. It was so bad it nearly brought me to vomit. I didn't want to be here for even a second longer. That feeling was as strong as could be. When I came to, the sky had brightened up a little, and Shibuya had transformed into a city of death. A.H. Hospital was still standing, but cracks ran up the walls, and the interior was in complete disarray. I only barely managed to make it out. The entrance to the outpatient clinic was swarmed with ambulances. The place was overflowing with people trampling over each other, fighting for medical attention. When I'd woken up, Ayase had smiled at me and said, "Let us return to Shibuya." It'd been just before 6 a.m. at that point, which meant that I'd been out for over 10 hours. Yua's body was nowhere to be found. I asked Ayase if she knew what happened to it, but she didn't seem to know. Shibuya was hardly a 5-minute train ride from Yoyogi, but due to the earthquake, all public transport was on halt. The railroad had been torn to shreds, meaning there was no way it was going to be restored within the day. So we were forced to walk, something that was way harder than it sounds. The road was full of holes, and rubble from fallen buildings was constantly in our way. It was difficult to even walk in a straight line. As a result, the trip back to Shibuya Station ended up being a 3-hour struggle. The surrounding area had been completely annihilated. Almost all the buildings had collapsed. Countless bodies were strewn out all around us. They were so pitiful, I couldn't stand to look at them. There were also a number of people still alive. Some were like us, just wandering along in complete shock, while others were crouched by the rubble, waiting for help to arrive. And of course, there were many people clinging on to the dead bodies as they bawled their eyes out. Even though they had survived, they all still seemed dead, like the trauma had drained them of every ounce of life they'd once had. The terrible odor of blood and dust filled the air, making even the act of breathing completely unbearable. Was this Gladioul's doing? Was Gladioul the name of the earthquake, maybe? I suppose that would make sense. They always gave their hurricanes names like in America, like Andrew or Katrina. Was this how Ayase wanted things to end? Was this the ending she wished to reach? Then again, if you wanted to bring about the apocalypse, this would probably be the best way to do it. Shake the earth! All of it! But there was no way a single person could cause a catastrophe on this scale, even with the powers of a Gigalomaniac, or Black Knight, as Ayase liked to call them. With several of them, though, it is. She said that the worlds shall fuse, and all shall be consolidated, or whatever. But what exactly has she meant by that? Probably literally what I was alluding to, namely how Noah 2 is the consolidation of code samples of various Gigalomaniacs. Basically, since the machine is combining the powers of several Gigalomaniacs, you could take that to be what's being referenced to the worlds shall fuse, the worlds being in reference to code samples. At least that's how I'm interpreting things. While following behind Ayase through the city, I took a peek at the side of her face. Unsurprisingly, even Ayase had turned pale when faced with the current state of Shibuya. She walked in silence, clenching her jaws as if trying to endure an intense pain.
Oi, minna! Koko wa abunai kara! Inan basho e ikkou!
A middle-aged man in a suit was screaming to the crowd. He was calling out to all the survivors in the area, us included.
救助を待ってたら日が暮れてしまう。避難場所まで行けばきっとなんとかなる。ここに留まっているよりずっとマシだ。辛いかもしれないが、立って歩こうじゃないか。俺たちには亡くなった人たちの分まで生きなくちゃならない使命があるんだ。
Where the hell had that old guy gotten so much energy from? A few people listened and started moving toward him, but most people stayed put. Ayase didn't even look at him. She just kept on moving toward her destination, and I had no choice but to follow. Suddenly, I felt a throbbing pain in my forehead. Ever since we left Yoyogi, I've been getting headaches just like this.
頼むよみんな立ってくれどうしてわからないんだここは危ないんだって瓦礫の下敷きになったらどうするんだ俺はみんなに生きていてほしいんだよ
My head hurt. What the? Wait a minute. This is just like what happened when he awakened his D-sword the first time in the first route. Suddenly, the world was dyed red once more. The sky was covered by vermilion clouds. It was the exact same thing I'd seen in my dream. The asphalt of the road, the concrete of the debris, the buildings, the shattered glass on the ground, the abandoned, broken down cars, the uprooted trees from the sidewalk. All of it had been corroded, overtaken by rust. Maniacal laughter echoed throughout the area. It was coming from the same person who had been trying to get everyone to take refuge just a second ago. They're all being attacked by Noah 2 terminals, aren't they? His body was covered in a cloud of black miasma. But it wasn't just him. Excluding the dead bodies, there were clouds of miasma around everyone I could see. The hazes were nearly human-sized. They swayed back and forth rhythmically, each one unusually vivid. It was a horrifying sight. It was exactly like in my dream. That man's laughter was starting to annoy me. Looking back toward him, I noticed that, for some odd reason, he had an assault rifle pointed straight at me. Well, that's interesting. Apparently silent weapons can also manifest assault rifles, too.
今なら警察いないから殺し放題じゃないか
Or maybe this guy just so happened to just be a crazed mass murderer waiting for an opportunity to indulge in his most sinister desires. Still doesn't explain where he kept the assault rifle hidden, though, but hey. He started spraying bullets. I immediately hit the ground. Don't hit the ground. The ground did nothing to deserve it. I'd been shot. Or so I thought. I had undoubtedly been standing right in his line of fire. But I didn't feel any pain. I lifted my head to double check.
避難場所に行けば水や食料それに毛布もあるここに留まっていても意味はないんだ
That was a delusion, wasn't it? In that case, then that answers everything. The gun wasn't real. None of that was. He wasn't holding a gun anymore. He was just pleading with the crowd around him.
さあ生きる気力を持とう無駄死に
But it all changed so suddenly. For a split second, the man's body was covered in static. Before the static, he had his hand raised up in the air, but after it, That hand was holding a gun. Doing that so quickly was humanly impossible. It was barely even coherent. It couldn't possibly be real. It was almost like watching a movie with severely jarring jump cuts. And then he started firing again. The people that were shot fell to the ground, blood spurting everywhere. Their screams echoed through the air. And yet somehow, none of the bullets were hitting me. It really felt like I was in a movie. It wasn't real life.
Takumi.
When I heard my name, I came back to my senses. Ayase was staring at me. She looked like she was about to say something, but in the end she didn't. She simply turned her back and kept on walking. I took a look at the sky. It was cloudy, but not red. I think I'm gonna sneeze. Son of a bitch. I took a look at the sky. It was cloudy, but not red. The surrounding scenery was overcast by a dark gray. No vermilion in sight. The shooter had gone back to pleading with everyone to evacuate. All the people who had been shot were now unharmed, and none of them were engulfed by black miasma. Miasmata? What the hell had just happened? Another one of my delusions? If it actually had been, then I must have really lost my touch. That delusion hadn't even been slightly realistic. Been like a movie or a video game or something.
Takumi, 早く来て.
Ayase urged me forward. Where the hell was she going anyway? Was she headed for the evacuation site? The one that guy was yelling about? But if that was true, then she wasn't going the right way. Instead, she went right into the Inokashira line station. What the hell was she thinking? There were no staff members at the station, and the trains were all stopped in place. Yase made her way down to the tracks and started walking along them. We're heading to Noah 2's location, aren't we? Naturally, the tunnel was pitch black. It wasn't designed to be traversed on foot, after all. It hadn't collapsed yet, but I felt like it was only a matter of time before it did. I would never imagine I'd have end up walking on railroad tracks like this. What an adventure, though. I should make a movie about it. Yeah, I was gonna say, Cloverfield? Wait, pretty sure there already was one. Granted, it had come out before I was born, so obviously I hadn't seen. Okay, then it's probably some other movie. I just knew it was about some people walking down railroad tracks to find a body. Definitely wasn't a movie I don't think I've seen then. Meanwhile, walking through this underground tunnel wasn't nearly as exciting. If we continued along this route, we'd eventually pass by the Shinsen, Komaba Todaimi, Ikunoe, and Shimo Kitsazawa stations. I apologize if I'm butchering the pronunciations. Getting in and out of Shibuya had been incredibly difficult, so using the subway tunnels was actually a pretty good escape plan. But we had started in Yoyogi. Now we were heading towards Shibuya. So something told me that Ayase wasn't using this as an escape route.
どこへ行くの?
深センの駅よ。
What the hell was the point of going there? Maybe she was planning to head to Sume from there? Or maybe my base? Actually, I never told her where my base was, so probably not the second one. Speaking of which, I wondered if Saratan had survived. What if the Kurenai conference hall had collapsed because of the earthquake? Oh god, all my poor waifus could be buried in rubble. Oh no, the horror. Suddenly, my trivial concerns were interrupted by a bright light. There was a railroad crossing right before Shinsen Station, where light from the sky peeked from above. After the crossing, the rails went into another dark tunnel, and after that was the Shinsen Station platform. The lights at the platform were out, likely due to the earthquake. It was pretty damn dark. There was almost no one around. All I could see were two girls sitting on the platform. Sena and Kozupi, yeah? Judging by their uniforms, they were Sume students. Ayase approached them without a hint of hesitation. Maybe she knew them or something. As we got closer, their figures in the darkness became clearer. My brow furrowed. I felt like I'd seen them somewhere before. And then I realized exactly who they were. Sena! Kozupi! Nailed it! But something was wrong with them. They should have been able to hear us coming, but they didn't even turn to look at us. No. They just sat there, their heads looking down at the ground, not moving.
Sena? Kozupi?
I tried calling out to them, but the two still didn't respond. What the hell was up with them?
黒騎士の心が殺されていく。だから回収するの。理想道。
Wait. No fucking way. I rushed over to the girls in a panic, then peered into Sena's eyes. I like how they're using the CG of when Sena is knocked on her back because of her father pushing her pushing her on the ground to save her from Suwa's gunshots. And I mean, there's not even a wall behind. There's not even a wall behind her, which I think they're trying to hide by having this black bar covering the upper portion of it. Like, holy shit! Now that's lazy. Sena's eyes were devoid of life. They were completely hollow. With no light left within them, they stared into nothingness. Those sharp eyes of hers, always glaring at everyone and everything. Not a single trace of them remained. She was trying to murmur something, but her voice was so incredibly faint, all that came out was a mere croak. I couldn't make out a single word she'd said. Kozupi was the same. The light behind her eyes had died out. Her mouth hung open, drool trickling down her cheek. She tried to speak, but her voice was too hoarse to understand. Something had happened to them. What the hell is going on in this city? I was absolutely clueless, so I turned to Ayase for answers. But she didn't seem remotely interested in their fates. Their D-swords were lying nearby. Ayase took her own sword and brought it near them. The same shrill sound from before reverberated throughout the station. The 3 D-swords began to warp and transform. Then came the shockwave, salting my body like a fierce gust of wind. And once it passed, Ayase was holding Seina's and Kozupi's D-swords.
これで6本揃った。
All that's left then is mine. Blushing in apparent arousal, Ayase looked at me.
匠、あとは君が手に入れるだけよ。
How could she be so calm right now? My frustration was then met by the same throbbing pain in my head as before. The world turned red once again. Everything began rusting, rotting, and eroding away. I could smell a strong odor coming from Kozupi. Kozupi slowly rose up from the ground. Her entire body was dyed red. Was that blood? Or rust?
殺してやる。
Kozupi raised her head. Her face was covered by black miasma. The sheer bloodthirst coming from her was terrifying. Kozupi stretched out her thin arms as if to try and strangle me. But when I blinked, she had somehow ended up back on the ground. Her head hanging downward, she had an indescribable expression on her face.
殺してやる。
Stack rang in my ears, and Kozupi instantly teleported beside me. The black miasma grazed my shoulder. A ghastly cold sent a chill down my spine.
みんな殺してやる。
Now this is pretty much a scene straight out of a horror game if I've ever seen one.
匠ちゃんも鏡でズタズタに。
Her whispers were emotionless and robotic. But that only made them all the more horrifying. I blinked once more. Seina's body was slumped over on the ground. She'd been cut to pieces. Kozupi violently swung down her arms and stabbed Seina in the head with a shard of glass. Dark blood stained Seina's long, beautiful black hair. Kozupi then raised a piece of glass in the air and stabbed her once more. Static. Now Kozupi was on the ground instead of Seina, and Seina had mounted a homeless man that appeared out of nowhere. Her head was buried in his shoulder. Her head was moving up and down constantly. What was she doing? Her hair was covering her face, so I couldn't really tell. That is, until she finally looked up. The man's shoulder was stained in blood. His flesh was minced like ground beef. I could even make out a little bit of pink muscle glittering from within. Wait, no. Was it blood? Muscle? Rust?
はあ、おいしいよ。
Seina. I'm sure it's crunchy, but your daddy's shoulder isn't a crunchy coon. Seina finally turned around. I could now see the blood surrounding her mouth. She was chewing on something, devouring it. Excuse me. My legs trembled, and the second I lost my balance and collapsed to the ground, the world returned to its original color. My headache vanished too. I pressed my hand against my forehead and shook my head intensely. I felt extremely sick, like I was about to vomit. I didn't really feel like a panic attack or shock or anything like that. It was more like a poison was slowly trickling through my veins, spreading through my entire body. One that hit me with a horrible, sinking feeling that weighed heavily on my mind. I raised my head and looked at Sena and Kozupi. They were still where they had been originally, on the ground, motionless.
どうしたの?
Ayase held out her hand. It was the same look from earlier, one that told me she had something more to say. I took her hand and stood up from the ground. We left Sena and Kozupi as they were. I just wanted to help them, but I really didn't have the strength to do so. And Ayase didn't care in the slightest. She's nothing if not goal-oriented, I'll give her that. We made our way back towards Shibuya Station. On the way, we saw countless wounded people on the ground, and just as many dead bodies lying around. Ayase looked up to the sky with her usual distant expression. Trying to stave off my nausea, I asked her a question.
Ayase はどんな結末を望むの?
結末?
Rimi was missing in action. Sena and Kozupi had both of their minds broken. Ayase had already taken the D-swords from all the Gigalomaniac girls. Or maybe stolen would be more appropriate. She had to have orchestrated all of it. How could she have not? There was no way she just happened to find a bunch of out for the count, mind-broken Gigalomaniacs that all had their D-swords out. Yeah, I won't lie. The events that have been playing out so far certainly have been awfully contrived, even compared to the other routes we've seen so far. There was just no way. If she was behind it all, then the earthquake was also her doing. Gladioul was just a legend she'd made up.
この地震が綾瀬の妄想じゃないって言い切れる? 綾瀬だって望んでたんでしょ?
そうね。
なんでこんなこと?
匠、結論を急がない。すでに予言されていたの。セイムラーによって。
Sure it wasn't by gyromancy?
It was foretold by gyromancy.
私はそれを知っていた。ただそれだけ。
グラジオール機は綾瀬の妄想じゃないか。そんな本 どこにも存在しないよ。
匠も見たはずよ。私の病室で。
ああ、見たよ。でもあれは白紙だった。
匠に見えていなかっただけよ。
そんなの詭弁だ。嘘だ。僕を騙そうっていうのか。
世界は約67億ある。つまり人類の全人口よ。
Yeah, and it was just like I was speculating earlier regarding her saying worlds will collide around the time that Gladioul's supposed to awaken. I do think she's actually referencing code samples from Gigalomaniacs.
異なっているの。それぞれの見ている世界は全く同一であることはないわ。匠と私もそう。
それが本当だって言うならそうそう出してよ。どうせ無理なんでしょ。
Ayase stared at me, then furrowed her brow. She seemed a little perplexed. It was almost like she was forcing herself not to show any emotion.
見たいの？私が見ている世界を。
できるならやってみてよ。たとえ見せられても信じないだろうけど。
違うわ、匠。君はもうすでに見ている。
Is that what I've been seeing for the past 20 minutes or so?
私の世界と君は少しずつ同期し始めているのよ。
Those delusions with that man and Kosuke and Sena, those are yours? That's your world?
何よ。
Oh my. The world rusted over once more. Those collapsed on the ground were engulfed by black miasma. I could see the head of a child crushed by the debris poking out through the cracks, and a man who was probably their dad trying to save them. Static rang in my ears again. And then, in an action that was incomprehensible to me, the dad stomped on the child's head. Jesus. Their head split open like a watermelon, and was subsequently crushed by their father's foot. Blood and gray matter splashed onto the ground. The stack came again. The child's head was now completely intact. I could hear the dad cry out to them, "Hold on! I'll get you out of there!" Static. The child had escaped from beneath the rubble, and now they were stabbing their father over and over again with a knife. "You're fucking useless, you old fuck," they jeered. The young couple were sitting in a somewhat remote spot. The two were under the same blanket, huddled right next to each other. When the stack came again, and engulfed the two of them, and the man began to rape her. Her screams echoed loudly throughout the city. But the screams stopped with more sounds of static, and the two were back together as if nothing had happened. Two middle-aged women were limping down the road. They were likely sisters. Static flashed, and one of them grabbed the other by the hair in an instant. They then began to yank on it and attempt to uproot it completely, and with the fierce sound of tearing, she most likely succeeded. The stack soon flashed again, and her hair was back to normal.
なんだよ、これ。
I gotta say, Ayase, your world is honestly kinda fucked up.
私の世界よ。
It was her world? It wasn't my delusion, but Ayase's? Wait, was it even a delusion? Or was it reality? I hope for all our sakes this isn't reality. A black miasma was hovering over Ayase's chest, too. But really, I didn't want to see any of them anymore, so I instinctively looked away.
匠の見ていた空はどんな色をしていた？
どんな青い。
あんな色？
You know, now that I think about it, this is the same color sky that we've seen surrounding Ayase before she jumped off the school rooftop. So she was basically in her world, so to speak, when she made that suicide attempt. Ayase pointed up to the sky. It was a shade of red.
あれは赤土色だ。
赤土色。あの色は 青じゃないのね。
どこからどう見ても青空じゃないよ、常識的に考えて。
でも私にとってはあの色が青なのよ。
What? She's saying. She always sees this world around her? God almighty. It's an absolute wonder that she's even outwardly as stable as she is.
匠は説明できるの。青色ってどんな色？
どんなって、だから空の色。
あの色の空しか知らないのよ、私は。
みんな青がどんな色かぐらい知ってるでしょ。
だから説明して、例えを使わずに青がどんな色なのか。
Without an example, how was I supposed to? Why not try syncing your world with hers, just like she's doing with you? I tried thinking of a way to explain it, but I came up empty-handed. I just couldn't come up with a way to describe the color blue. Upon noticing my complete loss for words, Ayase gave me a sad smile.
世界は約67億ある。そう言ったはずよ。空の色も67億通りある。みんな見ているものが同じだとは限らないわ。
The scenery went back to normal. This color was my world's.
綾瀬はずっとあんな世界を見てきたの。
Ayase gave a slight nod.
生まれた時からずっとそれが当たり前のことだと思っていたわ。世界の構造として。でも違うのね。今匠の話を聞いて理解できたわ。
あの黒いもやは何なの？
写真よ。誰でも持っているものなの、人ならば。そしてこの写真がグラジオールの糧となり、形を作り出していく。見えた？人々の負の妄想が。
Wait, was the stack causing negative delusions to bubble to the surface? Was that why I've been seeing all that inhuman savagery?
私は昔から見てきた。黒騎士ならば程度の差はあってもみんな見えているはずよ。そこにあるのはむき出しの悪意、むき出しの欲望。
Had Ayase been seeing the world like that ever since she was born? Apparently so.
匠、私が望む結末はこの錆びついた世界から魂ごと抜け出すこと。そのためにはグラジオールを倒さなければならないのよ。
Ayase moved closer to me.
だから見つけて、あとは匠だけなの。理想像を見つけて。
無理だ。
Unable to bear it any longer, I pushed Ayase away by her shoulders. Ayase's eyes opened wide in shock.
なぜ諦めるの？
僕は綾瀬が思うほどすごい人間じゃない。どれだけ望んでも理想度が手に入る兆候すらないじゃないか。 オフロントの時もそうだったし、地震が起きてからもそうだ。方法がわからないんだ。ディソードなんて手に入れられないよ。自信がないよ。
それならなぜ私を助けたの？
Ayase drew even closer. I took a step back, trying to stay away from her. Wait a minute, so you knew that it was Takumi that saved you then?
助けたって一体何のこと？
私が学校の屋上から飛び降りた時、君が花壇のある世界を生み出した。だから私は一つ上のステージに魂を移すことはできなかったわ。
That was a fluke. I hadn't done it intentionally.
それでもいいと思った。君の力を知ることができたから。あの時から君が私の希望になったから。
Please, don't place your hope on someone on a whim. Please, stop expecting anything from me.
たくみ、自分を卑下しないで。それは邪神王の精神侵略よ。負けてはいけないわ。君には力がある。確実に手に入れられる。必ずディソード。
無理だよ。
Before, I thought that I might as well stick with Ayase. I had no one else that could have protected me after all. But the more time we spent together, it became very clear to me. I couldn't understand how Ayase thought at all. The difference in how our minds perceived the world around us was just too great. And if I was being honest, I was fed up with how fucking batshit insane she was. She was a complete mental case, through and through. I really am a horrible person. And I've always been that way. I've never changed.
なぜそんなことを言うの？
Ayase clung to me, tears welling in her eyes. It wasn't the calm, aloof Ayase I was used to.
私はこんな世界にいたくない。お願い、解放して。私の希望になって。黒騎士として目覚めて。
無理だよ。
無理じゃないわ。
I synchronized with her world once again. A black miasma poured out of Ayase's chest and entwined itself around my body. It slithered around in the top of my skin, like an anaconda slowly strangling its prey to death. Its repulsive, chilling presence was enough to give me goosebumps. It was Ayase's pure, unadulterated desire. I, just like any other person, wasn't used to seeing people's naked emotions. A flash of static.
君は私の希望。
Ayase stared at me. Her eyes dyed pitch black.
君を離さない
You
わ。
could show me pitch black eyes in her character sprite at least, couldn't you?
常に止める。どんな手を使ってでも。
Ayase's fingers started undoing my jacket buttons one by one.
君が欲しい。
She was close as could possibly be. Just like the time we made out in the hospital room closet. It was like I was like a deer in the headlights. I couldn't move. Once she finished undoing all my buttons, my chest was exposed. But she didn't stop. She moved down, took off my belt, and unzipped my pants.
君、力が欲しい。
Ayase's ice-cold fingertips caressed my chest, and then her nails dug into me. The pain was so intense, and yet I still couldn't move an inch.
欲しいのよ。
Her fingers gouged out my flesh. They raked their way into my bones. Her hand reached deep inside, then gently embraced my pounding heart. I was trembling, out of fear, out of pain, out of the cool sensation of Ayase's fingers.
あったかい。もらうわね。
ダメ。
I could feel my blood vessels exploding. Copious amounts of blood spilled from my chest. She took it out. My heart. She... The world switched colors in an instant. It had gone back to its original, dull color. The rust had vanished. Now it's completely unharmed. I put my hand on my chest. Thankfully, I could feel it beating. My heart was still there. Ayase was standing in front of me, clutching herself with both arms. She looked incredibly sad, like she was about to burst into tears at any moment. There it was again. The same look as when she had taken Yua's D-sword. The same as when I had first seen her world back at the Scramble Crossing. The same as when she had obtained Seina's and Kosube's D-swords. Ayase looked at me on the verge of tears, doing everything she could to hold them back.
そんなつもりじゃないの。写真を制御できなくなっている。私も取り込みすぎたせいかもしれない。理想度写真王の精神侵食で私はおかしくなりつつある。
Wasn't it all just another one of her delusions? Wasn't it all just fake sword words meant to trick me? Those thoughts suddenly came to mind, but I didn't say them out loud. I just couldn't. Ayase was a girl who rarely showed any emotion, with her unwavering tone giving her clear command of any conversation she ever had. That was why it was so hard to see her like this. I'd never seen her so sad before. She looked so fragile, like she could fall apart even the slightest touch. Because of that, I knew that I couldn't tell her what I was really thinking.
僕はどうすればいい？
When those words left my lips, the slightest of tears began to flow from the corner of her eyes. She looked at me with a gaze that showed how much she truly needed me.
私は支配されつつあるわ。邪神王の攻撃によって。このままじゃ自我を保てない。だから取り除いて私の中を侵食する不浄なる邪神を
取り除くってどうやって？
私の世界を見たでしょ。あの黒いもやは人が持つ不浄なる邪神が具現化したもの。 むき出しの悪意。それを掴んで私の体から引き抜いて。
There was no way. I could never do something so horrifying. Well, we're gonna have to, otherwise she's screwed.
お願い、匠。私でいたいの。私の世界を救って。
Losing her balance, Ayase fell to the ground. Her figure was as frail as could be. But we had made a promise to each other. Once she had said herself.
君を守るわ。君も私を守って。
Sane and Kosubi had already been broken, and Rimi was nowhere to be found. I didn't want to lose Ayase, too. There was an element of selfishness to it. But most of all, I wanted to help her. I was fully aware that it wasn't within my ability to do so. But still, even if Ayase really was some crazy, hopelessly schizo girl, even if all this was just her delusion, I wanted to help her with all my heart. But, as I realized that sentiment, the world turned to rust yet again. The snake-shaped black miasma pouring out of Ayase's chest reared its head. Just looking at it made me feel sick. It felt like something was pressing down on my chest, and I couldn't look away. But even if I could, it wouldn't change anything. That's why I knew I had to try and face it head on. But I couldn't bear it. It felt like my chest was being crushed. My migraine was splitting my head apart. I couldn't do it. I never could have. I didn't have the strength to help anyone.
Takumi.
I looked up in response to Ayase's call. She held her hand out to me. Her tear-filled eyes locked in with mine.
来て。私を好きにして。
She showed complete trust in me. Or perhaps she was depending on me. I'd never had someone depend on me before. My mind was about to crumble to dust, but Ayase's voice just barely managed to keep it together. I bit my lip, and then I took a single step toward Ayase. With me as its new prey, Ayase's black miasma moved toward me and entwined itself around my neck. It was so cold, it nearly tricked my mind into thinking it was hot. It eased me into its embrace, but all the while, it was gently strangling me to death. Ayase leaned against me. Her body had gone completely limp. I was forced to support her entire body weight.
Takumi.
I tightly embraced her slender hips.
本当にいいの？
いいわ。
With a gulp, I reached my hand toward the black miasma pouring out of her chest. Following only an ephemeral moment, the miasma changed form to that of a black leech. An act that only served to make it all the more repulsive. That was Ayase's wicked heart laid bare. The most hideous part of herself that she didn't want anyone else to see. That was what the mass was. I took hold of the leech's body. It was extremely slippery, and it was so cold, it stung at my palm. I wanted to let go the second I grabbed it, but in a desperate attempt to hold on, I clenched my teeth and endured it. This background music sounds like something that would fit straight in Parasite Eve. Ayase groaned in pain, her face a horrid mixture of ecstasy and agony.
But...
I tried pulling with all my might, but I could feel her flesh being torn apart. Black liquid burst from her chest, covering my body from head to toe. Whether it was blood or something else, I didn't know. Despite all this, I pressed on, pulling on the leech as hard as I could. Where's a giant cigarette when you need one? Cigarettes hate being burned. If we had one of those or a really big cigar, I would just stick a lit one right on it here and just burn it.
大丈夫?
Unable to take her screams any longer, I stopped my hands in place. Hands atop which Ayase had placed her own.
止めないで。ダメじゃないから。
Even though her body was drenched in sweat, Ayase firmly reassured me. I couldn't hesitate again. If I did, I'd only be torturing her.
抜けろ!
Using every ounce of strength I had, which isn't much, I grasped the leech and pulled it out. Ayase's body twisted and writhed. The leech slithered around. It was a lot longer than I thought it would be. The leech curled into a circular mass, then wrapped itself around my arm. It tined hard against my fist. I guess it was the Wicked Heart's last stand. I clenched my teeth to endure the pain. I was glad I had gotten it off Ayase at least, but I wasn't sure what to do with it now. Wrestle the beast! Having entrusted her entire body to me, Ayase gently caressed my cheek.
不浄なる邪心は君の手で純粋な邪心へと変わるわ。
The black wicked heart wriggling my arm suddenly shone violet. A sound burst forth from it, a sound so shrill it was akin to the loudest of screams. Well, I'll be damned. We found yet another way to manifest a D-sword. The wicked heart turned into a D-sword.
これディソード
I'd wanted one so bad, but I'd never been able to get one no matter how hard I tried. But now it was finally in my grasp. Ayase's wicked heart had transformed into a D-sword.
目覚めたのね。
Uh-oh, she's bloody.
たくみ。
Even amid her intense pain, Ayase smiled in my arms. Sweat ran down her brow profusely, adhering her bangs to her forehead.
ありがとう。目覚めてくれて。
What had I done to deserve her gratitude? I didn't know. I had no faith in myself.
たくみ。
Ayase draped her hands around my neck, and then she tightly embraced me.
君だけよ。私の話を真面目に聞いてくれたのは嬉しかった。すごく。
Ayase's body was really warm. Black liquid on her chest was slowly turning red. Her blood stained my clothes. But I didn't care. I held Ayase tightly in acceptance. She still had trouble breathing. I could feel her back tremble with each breath. The smell of her sweat rose in the air. Even that part of her was as lovely as the rest.
大好き。
Had Ayase fallen in love with me? I may or may not depend on her, but I know she depends on me. So, I don't think a relationship like this will be too bad. Just the two of us. Suddenly, the sky behind Ayase's shoulders caught my attention. It was changing from vermilion to black, but only in a single spot. Or perhaps it was merely an illusion. In reality, the spot was just a star. Nonetheless, the ground gradually grew bigger. If it continued at such a speed, it would soon blanket the entire sky.
なんだあれ。
I mumbled that to myself, completely dumbfounded. Also noticing the unnatural phenomenon, Ayase quickly stood back up, using my shoulders to help herself do so.
あれが目覚めた邪神をついに侵略を始めたんだわ。結局私は間に合わなかったというの。もう止められないの。そんなことさせない。
Ayase brought forth her D-sword, materializing it from empty space.
どうするつもり？
グラジオール記目視録紙片にはこう書かれているわ。7本のディソードが集まった時、暗黒の大蛇が現れると。それは純粋なる邪神の塊。邪神をほふることのできる邪神。あらゆる崩壊を飲み込み、邪神王の身を砕くことのできる同質にして異質なるもの。その大蛇を出現させるのよ。グラジオールを倒すために。
Ayase was still trembling, and yet she readied her D-sword all the same, and closed her eyes the very next moment. It almost seemed like she was meditating. But, even after waiting a moment, nothing happened. Meanwhile, the sky had fully turned black. If I didn't know any better, I would have thought it was nighttime. But no, the sun hadn't set. It was the black miasma amalgamated into a mist that was spreading across Shibuya, transforming into a wave. It sought to drown the city in wicked hearts. It slowly crept over the rubble-filled earth, painting every inch it touched black. Suddenly, it eroded. It swept over our feet. A croak of despair came from my mouth. The corroded world was now rotting away. It decomposed, crumbled, and then it all returned to nothing. People, corpses, and debris alike. Everything slowly melted together, and from the amalgam came an overpowering, rotten stench.
綾瀬、どうにか ならないの？
どうして？
Ayase wasn't responding to me. She simply stared at the D-sword she held in her hand, her eyes on the verge of tears.
ディソードが7本揃っているのにどうして現れないの？このままじゃグラジオールに世界は飲み込まれてしまうわ。やっぱり黒騎士が7人集まらなければどうしようもなかった。
Yeah, well, not necessarily, if the first route is anything to go by. Might end up being different in the true ending route, though, which I suspect it probably will.
予言通りに進めなければダメだったのよ。
You mean to tell me that you've been knowingly following this prophecy of yours imprecisely this entire time? Yeah, I mean, that's certainly quite the screw up that you're owning up to in retrospect. To be fair, the black wave was growing even faster than before. It had only been up to my ankles a few seconds ago, but now it was already up to my knees. Strangely enough, I felt some resistance to the flow of it. Did it actually have physical substance? Was it really not just a simple illusion? Filled with horror, a shiver ran down my spine. Shibuya was actually going to rot away.
綾瀬が妄想すればいい。グラジオールを倒す妄想を。
Unable to hold it in any longer, I screamed at her. But Ayase just shook her head.
私の妄想じゃないわ。グラジオール機は。
だとしても僕にも綾瀬にもその予言をねじ曲げて新しい妄想を現実にすることは可能なはずだろ。それがギガロマニアックス、いや黒騎士なんだろ。
でも匠。
Ayase stared my way, her gaze pleading with me.
わからないの。どうすればいいのか。
Oh God. We're just gonna have to wing it. I was at a loss for words. The world was covered by black miasma. The sky was pitch black, blocking out any and all light. Not even a single star remained. The black wave was already up to my hips. It felt like I was going to be washed away by its current any second now. It took everything I had to stay standing. A corpse beside me melted into the liquid and was then swept away by the churning waters. If I let it swallow me up, that was exactly what would happen to me, too. The mere thought terrified me so much, I wanted to scream at the top of my lungs. What do I do? What the hell do I do? I desperately tried to think of a solution, but I couldn't come up with any. I was no hero. I was just an otaku freak. And even though I'd finally gotten a D-sword, I had no idea how to use it. So that ended up being just as useless as me. Everyone would be better off if I just died. I should have just gotten impaled by a bunch of stakes and bleed out. Like in the crucifixion case. But, right when I thought that, I suddenly remembered something. The songs Fess had written. Their lyrics.
歌を歌うんだ。
Despite how it might have sounded, it wasn't something I'd come up with as a last resort. No, I was convinced that it was the best, and also only, solution I could have ever come up with.
歌で綾瀬の妄想を世界に拡散させるんだ。
And the world she spun with them captivated the youth of Shibuya. The Gladioul saga was a legend of dubious authenticity that might or might not have been true. It could have all just been Ayase's delusion, and she was the only one who had any knowledge of it. But that didn't matter. That legend had been spread to the youth of Shibuya through Phantasm's songs. Therefore, mutual recognition had already been achieved.
だから歌うんだ。グラジオールを倒す歌を歌ってよ、フェス。
歌えというの？この状況で。
歌を歌うことで導きが現れるって前に言ってたじゃないか。
そうね、言ったわ。そしてあのライブで匠と出会えた。匠。
Ayase extended her hand to me. I took her hand in my own and squeezed it tightly.
匠は好き？私の歌。
You got a terrific singing voice.
うん。
I listened to the album I bought from that concert many times. I left the concert early due to my fear of crowds, but she made me want to try again, and again, and again, however many times it would take. See me not along, Ayase smiled blissfully.
ここで滅びても別にいいかもしれない。匠がそう言ってくれたから。歌うわ。聞いていて、匠。
Ayase closed her eyes, took a few moments to focus, before finally letting out a deep breath. Then she opened her eyes. She was no longer Ayase anymore. She was Fess from Phantasm.
最下に契約の地を。
She quietly murmured the song's name, and then she burst into song. Her voice reverberated toward the pitch black sky.
杭を打って杭を打って闇夜を切り裂き月光を浴びて幾千もの鉄意は汝の痛みとなりて今解き放たれるやがて叫びは宙に舞い夜空は赤く染まるだろう十字の杭は力となりやがて聖域へとたどり着く
The lyrics were a hint.
綾瀬、杭を打つんだ。
This song wasn't prophesizing the crucifixion case at all.
7本の偽装度を合わせて闇夜に打ち込むんだ。
There was no doubt in my mind. It was a song meant to overthrow Gladioul. A song to release Ayase from her world corroded by rust and red.
綾瀬の世界を壊せ。
Ayase stared at me. Her eyes burned with a fiery passion. Ayase looked her most beautiful when she was singing. Her energy had completely changed. The damsel in distress from before was nowhere to be seen. Ayase understood what I was trying to say, and, without saying a word, she nodded. I poured all my strength into our joined hands, and, while desperately fighting against the power of the black wave, I entrusted my D-sword to Ayase. The moment she grabbed it, it was engulfed in red light and swiftly disappeared. But it had been destroyed. As if it had been guided there, the red light was taken in by Ayase's D-sword. Once I knew that for sure, I let go of Ayase's hand. Ayase unleashed her power as a black knight. An enormous burst of wind came forth, blasting the world with enough force to make everything around her tremble. The black wave was struck by that pressure, turning into a whirlpool. There wasn't a fragment of her usual indifference in her anymore. Ayase took a stance. She spread her legs, lowered her hips, and held her sword high. Her whole body was overflowing with not just strain, but a strong will. The will to look toward the future. She was just barely able to hold back her urge for pure destruction. She had to wait for the perfect opportunity to unleash it all. The red flicker of the sword grew faster. That sword is that which bends fate to its will. That sword is that which converges all sorrows. That sword is that which interferes with the transcendental place. Fueled by wicked hearts, designed to rend others, its edge was double. It was the manifestation of all the cries for salvation that arose from Ayase's soul. An embodiment of Ayase's chaotic heart. Ayase's gaze was focused on a single point. The black heavens. The ones that shrouded my blue sky. The ones that shrouded Ayase's red sky. A sky born from all the impurity dwelling within wicked hearts. One that brought nothing but darkness to the world. The only thing I could do was pray. Would the Black Knights triumph? Or would Gladioul prevail? Our fate was resting on Ayase's shoulders. And yet, for some inexplicable reason, I knew. Just as foretold in the legend Ayase had orchestrated. We would never lose to the wicked-hearted king. So Ayase, strike it. Strike it, and pierce through the world itself!
開け天国の扉
Her entire body curved like a bow being drawn. And then, with all the strength vested in her, she cast her shot forth. The sword carved a trail of light, blew away the darkness of a loud boom, and pierced through the vermilion heavens. It had completely penetrated it. The sky began to crack. The crack spread throughout the entire sky, and before long, accompanied by a flood of sound. The entire world shattered.
助けを求める孤独の痛み掴むべき明日はどこ愛情も知らないまま深い絆刻まれ恐れるものなど何もないと叫ぶ空へ闇夜に扉現れた切なに静寂音のない世界心の闇を切り裂いてしまえばいい赤く滲んだ手が震える
When I came to, the brilliant light had returned to the world. The sky was blue, the color that couldn't be put into words. And yet I knew. The sky I was looking at right now was most definitely blue. Gladioul must have been overthrown. Or at the very least, the black miasma plaguing the world had disappeared. And now, a warm, soft hand tightly clasped my own. Ayase was standing by my side, looking up to the exact same sky I was. Without saying a word, tears poured from her eyes.
青はあんなに美しい色をしていたのね。
見えるの？
見えるわ。匠が見ているのと同じ色の空が。
And what a clear color it was. So clear I could feel it in my chest. So clear it almost hurt to look at. Who knew that the sky above was so clear? Before now, I had never once realized. Shibuya was in shambles, transformed into a city of death. Not even a glimmer of its former glory was left in it. And yet, Ayase, appearing more dazzling than ever, looked fondly over it all.
世界はこんなにも美しいのね。
And with those words, Ayase gently clasped my hand. I won? Guys, did I win? Well, this is interesting, to say the least, how this whole ending ended up playing out the way it did. Turns out singing to the monster was the key to our success for this story route. Now, if all it took was just singing, I probably would have ended up laughing. Because then we would have a literal example of singing the big bad monster Gladioul to death. but it wouldn't be quite as cool. Wouldn't be as much of a visual spectacle as just combining all the swords and then just throwing them into the sky and shattering the vermilion sky. Not as flashy as that. So, yeah. I could understand why they went with that. Rule of cool. But I'm confused. How did she run into Nanami in order to get her D-sword? Because in all the other story routes, she should have been held captive by Neosekken by that point in the story, around the time that we went to go visit Ayase in the hospital. On top of that, Rimi, I mean, I don't know when she could have possibly run into Rimi. I mean, I guess maybe it's possible she could have been at the hospital around the time we showed up here, seeing as how Shogun was there and all that. And now that I think about it, where did he disappear to in this route? What happened to him? But yeah, Nanami is the one I'm the most confused about in regards to how Ayase was able to obtain her D-sword. She shouldn't know about the planetarium where she was being kept. Because if she did, then she would have seen Noah 2 up close, and thus Gladioul. And that would have ended up causing all kinds of other issues with the story. Top of that, I never got confirmation as to how exactly she was able to steal the other D-swords too. All I can speculate is that real booting has something to do with it. Where she real booted her D-sword, and as she was doing that, she ended up touching her sword to the other swords. Something about the real booting process seems to enable her to take ownership of those swords. But if just simply touching them is all. But if simply touching the two swords together when one of them is real booted is enough, then wait a minute. Because I'm thinking. Every other instance we've seen two D swords contacting one another is during combat, where both participants would have their swords real booted in order to use them as actual lethal weapons against their opponents. So maybe it's impossible to steal a D-sword from another Gigalomaniac if both swords are being real booted at the same time. The effects end up, and that whatever effect is present that could potentially enable one Gigalomaniac to take the sword of another ends up being cancelled out through their own real booting process, if that makes any sense. I know I could probably explain this a bit better, but this is literally the only thing I can think of, is that, again, the real booting process and has something to do with how she was able to obtain those D-swords, and the other swords not being real booted probably also plays a role in it. Because otherwise, it would have been impossible for every other scene that we've seen Gigalomaniacs combating each other to happen. At least I would think. If I'm understanding this right, or thinking about this right. And finally, we never really figured out where all that blood came from that Ayase had on her either. So honestly, there's when it comes to Ayase's route specifically, I will admit this one is definitely the most confusing one of the bunch for me personally. I'm right here at the ending, and I feel like I've not only not really learned much of anything new, but I've actually come out of it with more questions than answers. I don't know. Maybe at least some of these questions I have here could be answered in maybe Rimi's route or the true ending route or something like that, or maybe both of them in bits and pieces. At least I hope so. Otherwise, yeah, I'm more confused. I'm more confused than anything thinking about events now. Seven out of 9. 2 left. We're getting close. I don't really think I have anything else to add at this point, so I think I'll just go ahead and cut things off here. And when we can return to this, we'll get started on Rimi's route next. She's our last heroine. Well, despite the confusion I'm personally feeling here, I don't know about you guys specifically, I hope you guys all enjoyed this latest episode of Chaos Head Noah. If you did and you'd like to see more content from me, feel free to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel, and I will see you all next time. Take care.